Hello, everyone, and just a happy digital thought that we're being live streamed on Facebook, and that's both in Spanish and English. Thank you very much for Peninsula 360 for your support. And now we'll formally begin the conference. So welcome to our weekly Zoom news conference. I'm Sandy Close, Director of Ethnic Media Services. Today, our focus is scams, one of our favorite topics. And a new report just released by the Federal Trade Commission on how consumer fraud impacts communities of color in the United States. The report reveals differences in the way that fraud and other consumer problems affect diverse populations. Why, for example, Black and Latino communities report more issues with car buying, credit problems, and debt collections than do white communities. FTC speakers will also highlight cases brought by the FTC in the last 5 years, where the unlawful conduct either targeted or disproportionately affected communities of color. EMS and our predecessor, New American Media, have organized ethnic media briefings for the FTC in over 30 cities and held teleconference calls over the last 7 years. I'm pleased to welcome 2 veteran FTC attorneys who have participated in many of these briefings, and to let you know that they, along with 2 other FTC experts, have agreed to schedule follow-up interviews with reporters one-on-one as needed. Please email me after today's call if you want us to coordinate a follow-up interview. Our first speaker is Monica Vaca, Acting Deputy Director, Bureau of Consumer Protections, who will be followed by Rosario Mendez, Attorney, Consumer and Business Education. Please, reporters and colleagues, enter your questions in the chat box, and we will take as many as we can after their presentations. To our speakers, please speak slowly, as I am trying to do for our interpreters who are simultaneously interpreting in Spanish, Mandarin, and Korean. We will email extended bios of each speaker and the Zoom video after the conference, as well as a link to the FTC report. And now we will begin with Monica Vaca. The stage is yours, Monica.
Thank you, and thank you so much, Sandy, for your help in organizing this. Thanks to all of you reporters who are here today. It is such a pleasure to see you again, and we are very excited to share with you our report on serving communities of color. So I work at the Federal Trade Commission, which you may know is the nation's consumer protection agency. And our mission is to help all consumers and to help them avoid scams and know what their rights are in the marketplace. We're here today because last week we announced a report on serving communities of color. This is a new report, and the report is new, but the work is not new. What this is an update on the FTC's progress in the last 5 years to address disparities and other issues affecting communities of color, with a focus on law enforcement, outreach, and research. So I'm going to cover today those, some of those topics, but what I want to sort of level set for is, how do we know what we're going to present to you today? How do we know? Where did this information come from? Some of it comes from our own law enforcement experience, the cases that we've brought, and an analysis of the customer databases in those cases. So that's a piece of it. Another piece of it is research that we have done into the reports that people file with our agency and with other agencies that contribute their reports to our agency. And those reports are so critical. They're so important to us because they give us a window into the marketplaces that different people are experiencing. So we're going to go over a lot of what we have learned from studying those sources of information. And let's just begin with cases, our law enforcement work. So fundamentally, the FTC is a law enforcement organization, and we sue people, organizations, companies that engage in deceptive and unfair practices. Since 2016, we've brought more than 25 actions where we could identify conduct that either specifically targeted or disproportionately impacted communities of color. And these are over a broad spectrum of industries. Let me just name a few of them: auto buying, for-profit colleges, prepaid cards, government impersonators, money-making opportunities, and student debt relief. So I'm going to talk through, that's a lot of issue areas, but I'm going to talk through 3 recent cases that I'm highlighting specifically because you might not think of them as consumer issues, but they are an important part of what the FTC does to protect people. And these are cases where communities of color were particularly affected. So the first one is a case that we brought against a company called Bronx Honda. And this is a case alleging discrimination in the sale of cars and other consumer issues as well. So according to the FTC, Bronx Honda and its general manager told its salespeople to charge higher financing markups and fees to African American and Hispanic consumers or customers. So it was a discrimination case. But they also, Bronx Honda, failed to honor their advertised sales prices. They changed the sales price on paperwork in the middle of the sale without telling the consumer, and they double charged people for taxes and fees without their knowledge. And finally, they told people that they had to pay unnecessary fees to purchase certified pre-owned, and I'm putting that in quotes, certified pre-owned cars that were not required by that program. As a result of that law enforcement case, we were able to get $1.5 million in refunds back for people. Here's a second one, Amazon Flex. So we know that people from communities of color are overrepresented in the gig economy. And gig workers do have protections, and the FTC has sued companies that fail to deliver what they promise, including Amazon Flex. So here's what we alleged. In its app and its marketing materials, Amazon advertises that drivers can earn $18 to $25 per hour, plus 100% of customer tips. But according to the FTC's allegations, during a 2.5-year period, and this was 2016 to 2019, customers thought they were tipping their drivers, not Amazon, but the drivers were left shortchanged. Instead of getting their full tips, the FTC charged that Amazon use those tips to supplement the base pay. The FTC also said that Amazon, despite receiving hundreds of complaints from the drivers who saw their pay decrease, continued to divert drivers' tips until the FTC notified the company that they were being investigated. In its settlement, Amazon agreed to pay back the tips in full. $61 million will be going back to Amazon Flex drivers. And a third case, this one is called Blessings in No Time. So the FTC works against pyramid schemes, which sometimes masquerade as something else entirely. In a recent case, the FTC and the state of Arkansas sued the operators of what we call a Blessing Loom investment program. We allege that it operated as an illegal pyramid scheme that bilked tens of millions of dollars from thousands of people. And importantly, that specifically targeted African Americans and that it harmed people who were struggling financially during the pandemic. So in our joint complaint with the state of Arkansas, we charged that the operators of Blessings in No Time lured people into joining their program by falsely promising investment returns as high as 800%. And some people who joined paid as much as $62,000 to participate. In reality, of course, it was just a pyramid scheme, and the vast majority of participants have lost their money, according to our complaint. So these are just some examples of FTC cases. And again, I raise them to your attention because they may not be what you think of when you think about consumer protection, but they're an important part of what the FTC does. And it's what we want to hear people tell us about if they encounter it. Now, Rosario is going to walk us through some of the research included in the report.
Thank you, Monica. All right, so I am going to, first of all, I'm putting on the chat a link to the report itself if you wanted to take a look, and as we are going through a few slides of information. Let's see, hold on. Share my screen. Sharing screen on Zoom always nervous. Okay, so what you're seeing here is one of the, well, let me back up a little bit. As Monica already mentioned, we, the research that is in this new report that we launched last week is the result of some research that one of our economists at the FTC did, where he analyzed the reports that come to the Federal Trade Commission through reportfraud.gov, reportfraud.ftc.gov, and also from contributors from Attorney General offices, other law enforcement offices that contribute their complaints to our database. The BBBs also contribute, for example, and other organizations. So he took that information from all those reports from 2020, and he mapped that against the U.S. Census demographic data to get a sense of, you know, who was complaining to us, from what communities, what were they complaining about, and, you know, and that kind of information. So that information has given us some insights about, you know, who's reporting and what are they reporting about. So this graphic that is also in the report, what it's telling us here is, you know, what we found was that communities report different issues, different communities report different issues. So for example, we found that the people living in majority Latino communities, the top report that they reported to us, the top consumer issue that they reported to us was impersonator scams. And you can see that on the graphic in the blue line, represented by the blue line. And in contrast, the Black community, of people living in majority Black community, the top report was credit bureaus. And you can see that under the credit bureaus and the red line. So we have different issues, the communities reporting different issues to us. The other things that were, you know, interesting, that I found interesting, were, for example, that both majority Black and majority Latino communities filed a larger share of reports to the FTC on car buying problems, which Monica covered a little bit in terms of cases that we've had against that. related to that, issues with banks and lenders, credit bureaus, which I already mentioned, and debt collection. And particularly in the Black community, you can see that the red line is has a larger share, which represents the Black community on debt collection and also on auto-related and bank and lenders issues. So those things give us an idea of what people are reporting to us, what they're experiencing in their communities, and gives us an opportunity to focus outreach and messaging and efforts on those topics. This one, this graphic represents one thing that we found very interesting as well was how people were reporting to us that on how they paid scammers. So different communities reported paying scammers differently. We found that in majority Black and Latino communities, they filed the largest share of their reports about paying with payment methods that have few or no, or if any, protection. So people in, living in majority Black and Latino community reported to us paying scammers with cash, with cryptocurrency, with debit cards. And so all those are payment methods that have less protections if they have any. And in contrast, people living in majority white communities reported to us paying scammers with credit cards. And that's significant because credit cards do have some protection against transactions that are fraudulent. Debit cards have some protections against unauthorized charges, but all the other methods, have very few protections. So that also gives us an opportunity to do outreach, education, and messaging in these communities to let people know that it does matter how you pay if something goes wrong. I already mentioned some of these things, but now I want to summarize some of the findings that are specifically to the Latino communities. And then Monica will come back and talk and summarize the findings that are specific to the Black community and touch on Asian and Native American communities. So law enforcers hear less frequently about scams and other consumer problems from communities with majority Latino population. And we've had this result in other consumer surveys and in other studies and from experience as well. But this gives us also an insight into, some backup into saying, people living in majority Latino communities are reporting less about their consumer experience than people living in white majority communities or Black communities. We also found, as I mentioned, that the top scam reported by people living in majority Latino communities was impersonator scams. And when I talk about when I say impersonator scams, I refer to situations where people get a call, for example, of someone saying that they're from the government, that they are from the IRS, and they're impersonating being, a government representative. Or they could be impersonating being a company that like Apple or tech support company. So those are impersonator scams. And then we also found that people living in majority Latino communities filed a higher share of reports about business opportunities and job scams. I find this significant too. Job scams, for example, is when a headhunter is asking you to pay to find a job. You don't have to pay to find a job. That's most likely a scam. The employer is the one that pays the headhunter, not you, the job seeker. Or a job scam opportunity, a job scam could be if you see an ad online for a job that requires you to send them money. So they say they're going to send you a large amount of money and you have to send money back. Maybe they send you a check and then you have to send some money back to them or to someone. And that is most likely a fake check, and it's not really a job, a real job. So we also seen business opportunities where, in cases where entrepreneurs are trying to start a business and they get in a situation where there's a business coach that's telling them that they have to pay money in order to get access to important information to set up their business. And it turns out that they, don't really help them set up the business as they had promised. So those are some of the examples of business opportunities and job scams. And then we also found, as I mentioned, that people living in majority Black and Latino communities reported to us using payment methods with fewer protections. But in particular, people living in majority Latino communities file larger shares of reports about bank transfers and wire transfers than other communities. So with that, I'll pass it to Monica to talk about the Black community.
Thank you, Rosario. I want to address one question that I saw in the chat that is relevant to this discussion, and that is, somebody asked, well, which bar reflects what's going on in Asian American communities? And the reason that is not reflected in that chart is because this is an analysis that was done based on zip code matching. So when we collect reports from the public about what they're experiencing in the marketplace, we don't ask people their race or ethnicity. So we don't actually have that very granular data. Instead, what we have done is we have looked at the zip codes that people have entered as their addresses. And those zip codes we then match with census data. And that census data can tell us whether in that zip code we have a demographic population that constitutes a majority population. So majority white, or majority Black, or majority Latino. There were very, very few zip codes that were majority Asian, and so Asian American. And so it was not possible to do that same kind of robust analysis that we were able to do with the other communities. However, I will have slides that talk about some of the consumer protection issues affecting Asian populations and Native American populations as well. So just stay tuned for that. Okay, well, let's talk about what we did learn from those reports from the public, from people who live in majority Black communities. So as you can see from this slide, the top problem reported had to do with credit bureaus. And so frequently these are problems relating to trying to get something inaccurate off of a credit report, those types of issues. We also saw that people living in majority Black and Latino communities were reporting lots of problems about banks and lenders and debt collection. So I would put that in that very first bucket there of sort of financial related problems. We also saw a higher percentage of reports about used car sales. So that is interesting, and that sort of ties in with what we saw in that first case that we talked about with Bronx Honda. And then finally, we had a lot of, well, this is not reports from people, but rather in an analysis of our own cases, so the FTC's own law enforcement actions, we bring cases against student debt relief providers who have deceived people in some material way. And in an analysis of those cases and the customer database, we could see that the people who were affected in those cases were more likely to live in a majority Black zip code compared to the general population. So ready for the next slide. Okay, thank you. Other things. And money-making schemes. So again, we did see a disproportionate number of people who lived in predominantly Black communities in our databases, in our cases where we alleged that the defendants were engaged in some kind of a scheme to offer a money-making opportunity. So you can make money in this, in my program, join my program and you will make money. So that was significant for the Black community. And then as Rosario mentioned, we also saw in the Black community that when people reported losing money to a fraud, when they reported losing money, they told us how they paid, and they told us that they were paying with some methods that were less secure than others. For the Black community, the #1 payment method was debit cards. And people living in majority Black communities filed more reports about using payment apps or services and gift cards than people living in other communities. Why does that matter? So that matters because how you pay can determine how easy it is to get your money back if you are defrauded. The payment method that has the highest protections is credit cards. That has the highest fraud protections. But there are other payment methods that have very few fraud protections. And so we definitely want to get the message out to people that there are some methods that are just very difficult to get your money back if you are defrauded. You know, gift cards is one of them. So do be careful with paying how you pay for anything. And remember that gift cards are for gifts. They are not for payments. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I did promise you that we were going to have some information about how fraud is affecting Asian American and Native American communities. And these are the top 3 things we've seen: the bogus health products, the auto financing issues. And let me talk through 2 of those with some specific examples. Okay, so during the pandemic, and some folks have mentioned this in their chats, you know, we have seen a lot of promoters of these health cures, sort of bogus health treatments, cures, all of that stuff relating to COVID, health claims related to COVID-19, including some products that were advertised specifically to the Korean and Vietnamese speaking communities. For example, I'm going to say the name of the case, it's QYK Brands, was a case that the FTC brought, where we alleged that the defendants failed to deliver on their promise to quickly ship face masks and sanitizers and other products. And we found that they marketed to Vietnamese American communities in the US using Vietnamese language videos. We've also sent hundreds of cease and desist letters, both in the United States and abroad, to stop making unsubstantiated claims that products can treat or prevent COVID-19. So those were a couple of cases that we brought. And then we have another auto case. So in Tate's Auto Group, it was a case we brought against 4 auto dealerships where the FTC alleged that the defendants falsified people's income on vehicle financing application. They falsified people's down payment information on financing applications and contracts, and they marketed deceptive ads that were offering vehicles for sale, financing, and lease. Many of the customers in the Tate's Auto Group case were citizens of the Navajo Nation. And the dealership frequently ran radio ads and print ads in Navajo media. So to reach these communities and many communities of color, we work, very carefully with some of our trusted partners, including the Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission, which was instrumental in helping us identify this case and bring it. And those trusted partnerships are something that we rely on. I know you all rely on that to be able to give your readers and viewers and listeners information that they can use. And we would continue to encourage those organizations to reach out to us and talk with us and tell us what they are seeing, because it is really critical for us to be able to do our job better, to know what's going on. Okay, and then the last slide, let's see. Oh, Rosario, do you want to talk about the resources the FTC has?
Sure, thank you, Monica. I just want to mention quickly a few of the resources that we have that are available to you and when you're researching or when you are doing a piece on one of these issues and you want to refer people to where to find more information. Our consumer education is all at consumer.ftc.gov. We have spent a lot of time over the years listening to people, listening to communities, and trying to figure out how to best get information out there. And we have information, for example, in consumer.gov that is very simple, like basic consumer protection information. We have what we call the Pass It On campaign, which is empowering older consumers with information that they can pass on to others. And we have the fotonovelas, for example. Many of you have already seen it. Maybe you've seen them, but they are like graphic style, like comic style graphic novels in Spanish that are, specifically created for Latino, the Latino Spanish-speaking consumers. You can order free publications from us. That's another thing to also make people aware of, that you can get all these publications at ftc.gov/bulk order, completely free. And then now Monica is going to talk about report fraud.
Thank you, Rosario. So as we've alluded to throughout, the way that we know about what is being experienced in these different marketplaces is because people file reports. They tell us what's going on. And so I want to give you the resource of where you can tell your readership and viewership and listeners to report. It is reportfraud.ftc.gov. You can file a report in Spanish at reportefraude.ftc.gov. You can go to that website now and look through the various categories of reports that we take. We also have a feature on that site that is what we call a something else feature. So if you don't see immediately the category of problem that you think you want to report, you can still file a report easily. So a couple of things about this. First of all, filing a report, we hope that it will give you good, actionable information if you've lost money. So a lot of people who file reports with us tell us that they encountered a fraud, but they didn't lose any money. They were able to recognize it, and they have come to our site and they've reported it. And that is awesome. That is great. That is the best sort of scenario, because now we've learned about something and the person did not lose any money to it. But that data point helps us do our jobs. It also helps other law enforcers do their jobs, because every report that goes into this database, which feeds into a database called the Consumer Sentinel Network, every report that feeds into that database is shared with 3,000 law enforcers across the country, so that they can do their jobs also, and bringing cases that are affecting their communities. So that's a very helpful thing. But then also, if you have lost money, we talked a little bit about different payment methods and how you have different rights with different payment methods. So that's a really important thing for people to know, because the action that you can take to get your money back or try to get your money back is going to be different depending on what kind of payment method you used. So if you paid with a gift card and you tell us you paid with a gift card, we can serve up to you some advice about what are the next steps. Who should you call next, and what should you do next to try to get that money back? It's hard to get money back when you've been defrauded, but it's not actually impossible. So what we tell people is try, file your report and try. So that's one really important reason to file a report. A second reason is because, and we've alluded to this throughout, we bring law enforcement cases. When we bring law enforcement cases and we're able to settle the case or win a litigated judgment, we have a pool of money that we want to give back to people, just like in the Amazon Flex case, just like in the Bronx Honda case. We want to know who to give that money back to. Usually we can get information from the people we sue about who their customers were, but we can't always, right? Sometimes they don't keep great records. And so if people file reports in our database, it helps us know who were the people that we should try to get money back for if we don't otherwise know who the customers were. So that is another reason to file a report. Again, no guarantees, obviously. We bring about, trying to think, we bring cases, less than 100 cases in a year, but those cases affect hundreds of thousands and millions of people. Last year, we were able to get back some very large number, and I'm gonna forget the exact number, but I will make sure to get it for you. Hundreds of millions of dollars back to people in refunds. And that is when we bring law enforcement cases. So it is worth your time to do it. And then the last pitch I will make for filing a report is that law enforcers can't do anything about a problem if they don't know it exists. So it is really important to tell us what is going on and let us know what is going on. One question in the chat, and I certainly share this frustration, is, wow, some of these people should go to jail for what they're doing, right? I couldn't agree more. It's for the FTC, we happen to be a civil law enforcement agency, which means that we don't lock people up, but we do get money back. And that is an important part of our job. When appropriate, we do refer them to the criminal authorities. And we have been successful in getting lots of people prosecuted by the criminal authorities. Oh, and here's Jennifer Leach providing some information about money back and how much money the FTC has gotten back for people. Thank you, Jennifer. It's in the chat now. And actually, if you 1.66 million people getting back 106 billion. I'm not sure that was right. $106 billion. I think it was something less than that. Million. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Jennifer. But millions of dollars back for people.
Monica,
so
it's great.
If you go to the link that Jennifer provided, you can actually look at the statistics by state. So you can look up your own state and see how much money people got back in your state.
Great. We have so many questions. I'm going to ask you to, you both have done a terrific job. You not only spoke slowly, but you were very compelling. I'm going to start with the first question. I very quickly, Monica, would you say that scams perpetrated by big businesses like Amazon add up to the worst of the scam world, or is it the aggregate of all the smaller scams, or is there any way to to make that distinction?
It's so hard to make that distinction. There are so many different scammers who are out there, and what we want people to know today is to be on the lookout for them, for all of them, and not just for the ones that that may be that may be household names. So please be on the lookout for anybody who approaches you. Frequently, it will sound like somebody you know, a business you trust, and these are the impersonator scams. And so we just want people to be on alert for all of them.
Well, and a related question from our co-coordinator, Anthony Advincula. Anthony, I'm going to read it just in the interest of time, and then I want to get to the questions from our colleagues. Oni asks, scams are like diseases. They spread, they infect, they go viral. Have you eradicated? Is there an example of a scam you've eradicated? Now, that's a very journalistic, literary question, but it's a wonderful image.
Well, let me follow up on the analogy there, or the metaphor that Oni is using, and say that, you know, while we cannot eradicate all scams, what we can do is inoculate the people in our community from falling prey to scams, and we can inoculate them with information. And we know that. We know that research has shown that when people know about a specific scam, they are far less likely, 80% less likely to lose money if they have heard about a scam when it approaches them. So please do spread the word, and we want to encourage people to be talking about these stories and sharing their experiences.
So let me go to Peter White, who I think has an important question for Rosario Mendez. Do you want to ask your question, Peter?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
My question was, we have all these used car outfits here in Tennessee, and they have big signs that say, buy here, pay here. And I'm pretty sure it's probably somewhat like the payday loan scams that people fall for. But how does that work? Could they explain how that works? They just lock in excessive penalties and fees, or is there some other scam related to it?
And Peter's in Nashville, where used cars proliferate just for miles and miles, used car dealers. Who wants to, it's a very important question of trying to understand the mechanisms by which, when you try to get a used car and you are told to buy here, pay there. Can you give us a little bit of a description of how people get scammed in those used car deals?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I am not one of the experts at the FTC on auto sales, but I would be happy to connect you with one of them. Generally speaking, what we see with a lot of those used car sale problems are misrepresentations about the price, about the financing. And when you're talking about, you know, buy here, pay there, buy here, pay here, really what you're talking about is who's going to offer you the loan to buy that car, right? So that financing and those financing terms are really significant. The other thing we see is the sale of products that go along with that used car. And I would say that the Bronx Honda case in that is instructive there, because we saw so many different abuses. You know, finally, one other thing that we see with some, or that is reported to us, is, you know, sort of the yo-yo financing problem.
Well, that's a terrific idea to do a special interview with one of your specialists on used car sales scams. Thank you for that. Pilar Marrero, do you want to ask your very important question as people spread anti-vax content?
Yes, hi. Thank you for the information. I've been monitoring this information for a while now, and there's a lot of scams coming out of people's vulnerability around COVID-19. But these people do more than just scam people. They spread this information. They create vaccine hesitancy. They tell you that you only need to just make your defense system in your body, your immune system stronger. So here's a vitamin, or here's sometimes they link directly to substances that are dangerous, like hydrochloroquine or chlorine dioxide. So these people are actually actively helping spread the pandemic or keep the pandemic among, not just scamming people into buying stuff that's not going to keep them from COVID, but they're actually making the pandemic stay around. So I know this is tough because these are usually international. You don't know where they are sometimes. They spread through social media, but have you put your eye on any of this?
Yeah, so we have actually been very attuned to the claims that people are making, and we do that in a number of different ways, including online serfs. As a result of those online serfs and looking for this information and all of the reports that we get from people, we have identified lots and lots of those types of claims. What we have done in order to get those claims taken down as fast as we can is we've sent out cease and desist letters. So stop making those claims immediately. And if you don't stop making those claims, the FTC may take law enforcement action against you. And we have done that. So we have sent out hundreds of those letters. That helps. I share your frustration that stemming the tide of all of this misinformation is extremely difficult. And it causes really substantial harm. Certainly we see it in with COVID, but we see it with all other kinds of health claims as well, where people who are pitching cures for diabetes or cancer or something else actually wind up dissuading people from getting actual treatment that they need. So it is particularly egregious, and the harm is particularly pernicious. And those are things that we do keep our eye on.
Let me go quickly to our next. We have so many questions. I want to get to as many as possible. Sunita Sarabji, would you ask your question about how you can link economic status to vulnerability?
Yeah, thank you so much for taking my question, Sandy. I was going to ask about the link between low-income communities and a higher level of scam. Are you seeing scams that are related to a lack of resources, such as you mentioned people paying with credit cards, for example, for their cars? Low-income people may not have access to credit cards. Is that part of the issue?
So that's an excellent question and very, very perceptive. What's interesting is that we do see scams that do target lower income communities. And sometimes they are, scammers are opportunistic, right? So they're going to target you for whatever they think that you need in the moment. And, we do sometimes hear from people like, oh, well, are they really going after people who have less income? Well, they do. Scammers do that all the time. And they can do that in a number of different ways. They can do that by impersonating the electric company and saying that you're behind in your payment and your electricity is going to get cut off. Or they can do that by by claiming that they are the IRS and you're about to get arrested if you don't pay up right away. They do that by doing awful things like threatening deportation, right? I mean, these are scammers on the phone. They will say anything to try to get money from people. Yes, that may be one reason why we do see people paying with some of these mechanisms that are less secure, is because these type of hardcore frauds, they demand payments that are very difficult to trace. Very difficult to reverse, and that help them stay anonymous. And that's kind of the key piece of it. So that may be one reason.
Thank
Okay,
you. Would it be okay to ask the question about tips?
okay, quickly, but, and Monica, I'm going to ask you to make your answers very short, although they're each of them fascinating. I want to get through all the questions if I can.
Sorry, just a second question. I know you mentioned about going after Amazon for tips. Are you also targeting Instacart, Uber, and other delivery services?
We look broadly at the marketplace, but I can't comment on any investigations.
Okay, great. Let's go to Moshin Zahir with your question. Moshin, can you come in, please?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, my question is that most of the victims, they say we don't want to make a complaint because they are under the impression that most of the scammers, they operate from out of country, out of United States. They said even if we complain, there's not gonna be any remedy. So how would you respond to this impression?
Okay, thank you for the question. So, filing a complaint it is an important source of information for law enforcers in case they can take action. So we hope that people will file those reports. People can also file anonymously, and I know that there is sometimes concern about filing complaints in your own name. You can absolutely file anonymously.
But the question of, can you apprehend, can you really go after the
Yes.
fraud, the scammer in Mumbai or the scammer in wherever?
Somalia or anywhere
Yeah.
in the
Yeah, those are the hardest cases because when cases cross international boundaries, they do tend to become more difficult. They're not impossible. Frequently, there is some amount of U.S. presence, could be bank accounts that make it possible if it's a large organized ring. Sometimes that we are able to work on those cases, and our partners at the Department of Justice as well.
Is there, I will just ask a quick follow-up question to that. Is there one region where there's sort of more apt to be scammers hitting the United States from abroad? Is there one hotspot overseas where scammers are particularly numerous?
Well, I wouldn't say that we have any kind of survey evidence on it, but we have certainly seen lots of fraud, telemarketing fraud coming from India and from the Philippines, and not as much as of late, but before from Canada.
What's interesting, because they're all English, there's heavy English component. Okay, to be Zaya, please ask your question. Thank you so much for joining us. You have to unmute. If Alexis, can you unmute? And if not, I can ask your question to be say, just because of time, if okay, because it's very good. What are some of the recommendations you can give to people of color when buying a car? Dealing with dealers can be a headache. You said it. And what should they be paying special attention to?
Maybe Rosario, I think you put in the chat the information on our used car buying guide. Do you want to address that?
Yes, yeah, I put a link to our consumer.gov article on buying a used car, which gives you information about, what the buyer's used car guide is, which is required by dealerships to give to you when you're buying a used car. Things to know and what to do. And in the what to do section, you have a few tips on what to do, what to do before you even start shopping for a car. Like, deciding what kind of car you need, deciding how much you can pay for the car, thinking about all the costs to register the car, your state, the sales taxes, car insurance, things like that, just to make sure that you know what you're getting into from the get-go. And then, also there's tips there on how to avoid problems with the dealer financing and what to do if you have some problems with dealership financing. And so we do have information on that. And there's also an article on buying a new car. So we can put that link to that article as well on the chat.
Great. I'm going to go. Sorry, go ahead.
I also just wanted to add, in terms of the previous question, that the FTC does have internet agreements with other countries and for cooperation. So we do work with other countries to try, as Monica was saying, some of the specific countries. But I just wanted you to know that we do have an international division that has memorandum of understanding with other countries and facilitate that cooperation.
Great. I'm going to go straight to Don Tagala with your question. Don, can you ask your question?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, hi. So, because there's a lot of fundraisers in the Filipino community saying they're raising funds for whatever, but then, when you get in touch with the actual foundation, they say, oh, they did not get any money. So what can be done about fundraisers that pocket the money instead of giving it to the actual charities?
Great question.
File a report about that. And the more people that file a report about a particular fundraiser that happened where the money didn't go, the more helpful that is.
Great. Gabrielle Lerner, could you please ask your question? And if there's...
Yes, can you hear me?
Great.
Okay. Who are the scammers? What is their story? Are there big corporations and criminal cartels abroad in Russia or some other country? Or are they scammers that belong to our communities and operate in the same communities?
Such a great question. Both of those things. They are both of those things. We have sued scammers who really just set up shop in a particular community, and their MO is to just target their community as much as they can. Sometimes they take on roles of sort of facilitators, I will help you understand the tax system. I will help you understand the immigration system. I will help you do, transact your business with the government. That is certainly one model that we have seen and is pernicious. We have also seen the other model that you mentioned, where people are based offshore, and it's a much bigger network of people. And they have, sort of various aspects to them. They are collecting money in the United States. They have a telemarketing operation. They're using voice over internet providers to help them get their calls in, spoof phone numbers. So they can be very, very sophisticated, technologically sophisticated, and they can just also be very good at making believe that they can help you.
We have time for one more question. Unfortunately, I can't believe it. I was going to call on Julia Dudley because she always asks great questions. But we have a question from Khalil Abdullah. Khalil, can you ask your last question?
Sandy, can you hear me, Sandy?
Yes.
Okay, I think my question was answered in the chat, but I was trying to understand the difference between bringing action, because there were 25 actions that were mentioned, and then there was 100 cases mentioned in a year. And just for the sake of clarity, was trying to find out whether an action and a case was the same thing. And Rosario said, indeed, they were. So that was just to clarify for me as a journalist, when I say an action or when I hear it, is it the same as a case when we're writing about it and reporting?
Right. And you got your answer more or less in the chat because
Right, Rosario said she can speak to that, but as I understand it, an action and a case are just interchangeable terms for the same thing.
right.
Yeah, the way that we're talking about it is the same thing. It's just that sometimes, so the 25 was because since 2016, we have seen, we've established 25 cases or law enforcement actions against companies or individuals where we could identify that we're either targeting communities of color specifically, or their actions, their bad conduct was impacting communities of color in a disproportionate way, so negatively. So so that was the 25, and then the 100 that Monica said. She just mentioned that in any given year, the FTC may establish about 100 cases in total. But they do have, so it sounds like a small number for an agency, but it really has a big impact in terms of the money back and the impact in the community, stopping the bad conduct.
Well, they say you should end a party when everybody is having a great time. We've run to the end of the hour, but I do feel Henrietta Burrows, who asks also regularly on our briefings very important questions. Henrietta, do you want to take the last question? And then I swear I'll close the conference.
Many thanks, Sandy. In terms of going after scammers, have you had the cooperation of social media operators like Facebook, who've been under fire for just thinking of their own profits?
So we certainly do alert them about those issues, and you know, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to get back to you with an answer for that question, because I'm just trying to remember if those are public or non-public. That's public or non-public information.
Well, you guys have been just tremendous guests. Very, very open, very informative, very eloquent. We want to thank you, all of us. Thank you for your time and your expertise. And however many briefings I've attended, there's something special because you both have your hearts in this issue. And so it's really a great honor to listen to you walk us through the world of scams. Thank you very much. And this conference is now adjourned.